The search for silence is the defining quest of a loud life. For 30 years, my world had been a symphony of urgency, the crackle of the radio, the shrill ring of a 3 a.m. phone call, the percussive slam of a squad car door, the cacophony of human crisis. I didn't just work in that world. I conducted it. So when the promotion to chief finally came, the first thing my husband, Mark, and I did was buy a sanctuary, a place where the only siren was the call of a loon across the water. We found it at Lakeside Landing, a small, rustic cabin tucked away in a quiet cove on Lake Avalon. It was a holdover from a simpler time, built of cedar and stone, with a sprawling wooden deck and a private dock that stretched out into the cool, deep water. It wasn't a house. It was an exhale, a place where I could shed the crushing weight of my uniform and my title and be just Sarah. A place where Mark, a recently retired music teacher, could finally find the quiet to compose. For the first 2 months, it was a dream, rendered in pine and water. We read. We paddled the canoe. We let the profound peace of the place wash over us, cleansing the grit of the city from our souls. The peace was shattered by a woman who moved with the sharp, discordant energy of a clipped signal. She appeared on our deck one Saturday afternoon, uninvited, her footsteps on the gravel path a series of sharp reports. She was in her late 50s, with a severe helmet-like haircut and a tennis dress that seemed starched with indignation. She clutched a clipboard to her chest like a riot shield. "This is private property," Mark said, his voice always gentle firm with surprise. He stood up from the deck chair he'd been mending. "I am Patricia Vance," she announced, the name delivered as if it were a verdict, president of the Lakeside Landing Homeowners Association. "And you are in violation." I stayed in my chair, a book open on my lap, and watched her. I'd spent a lifetime reading people, and this one was an open book, a classic narcissist with a deep-seated need for control, likely stemming from a profound loss of it in some other area of her life. Her authority here, in this small pond, was everything to her. A violation of what Mark asked. Her eyes, small and hard, fixed on the stone fire pit I had helped Mark build the weekend before. It was our favorite part of the cabin, a place of warmth and quiet conversation. "That," she said, her finger jabbing the air, "that is an unapproved, open-flame structure. Article 9, Section F of the Community Covenants explicitly forbids wood-burning fire pits. All outdoor flame features must be standardized. Gas-powered models from the approved list. It's a matter of fire safety and aesthetic unity." "It's perfectly safe," Mark countered, ever the reasonable man. "I built it to state park specifications." "I am not interested in the state park," she snapped, a muscle fluttering in her jaw. "I am interested in our rules, the rules that protect our property values." She gave me a dismissive glance, then focused back on Mark, clearly identifying him as the softer target. "You are new here. You may not be aware of how we do things. This is an exclusive community. That pile of rocks is a blight. You have 1 week to remove it. A formal notice will be posted." She pivoted and marched away, leaving a vibrating silence in her wake. Mark slumped into his chair, a look of weary frustration on his face. So much for peace and quiet. I closed my book and took his hand. "Hey," I said, my voice soft. "It's okay. This is just a probe. She's testing for weakness, seeing how we'll react." "How should we react?" he asked. "Professionally," I said, a small, hard smile touching my lips. "We will be calm. We will be cooperative. We will be meticulously, exhaustingly, by the book. I looked out at the lake, the water calm and untroubled. And we will start a file. We'll log every interaction, every notice, every conversation. We will give her all the rope she needs. Mark looked at me, a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. He knew this version of me, the calm, analytical strategist, who saw every conflict as a puzzle to be solved, a case to be built. Patricia Vance thought she was laying down the law to a couple of quiet retirees. She had no idea she had just made herself the primary subject in a long-term investigation conducted by a woman who had written the book on how to dismantle people like her. The battle for the soul of our sanctuary had just begun. Our initial strategy was one of what I called aggressive compliance. We would not give Patricia Vance the emotional confrontation she so clearly craved. Instead, we would drown her in procedure, using her own rulebook as a weapon against her. It was a tactic I'd used countless times in my professional life to de-escalate volatile situations, control the process, and you control the outcome. The formal notice, as promised, was taped to our door. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic intimidation, citing bylaws that I was fairly certain didn't exist. Mark, now my willing co-conspirator, spent an evening online and confirmed the bylaw Patricia had cited. 12C was about satellite dish placement, not fire pits. His transition from frustrated victim to active investigator was a welcome sight. Armed with this information, we drafted a polite, formal letter to the HOA board. We acknowledged receipt of her notice, stated our sincere desire to comply with all valid community rules, and respectfully requested clarification on Bylaw 12C, attaching a printout of the actual bylaw from the HOA website. We also requested the official list of approved gas-powered models and the vendors who supplied them. We sent it via certified mail. Return receipt requested. This, I said to Mark, as I slid the postal receipts into the thick binder I'd labeled Vance, P, Internal File, Naruto 25A, is now Exhibit A, a time-stamped, legally documented record of our good faith attempt to comply, and her fraudulent use of the covenants. Our procedural correctness seemed to infuriate Patricia more than open defiance. She wanted a shouting match, not a meticulously documented correspondence. Her response was to unleash a torrent of petty, increasingly desperate fines, clearly the product of her spending hours scouring our property for any conceivable infraction. The first was a $75 fine for improper storage of marine propulsion devices. The device was our canoe paddle, left leaning against the cabin wall. The notice cited a bylaw requiring all boating equipment to be stored indoors. Mark found the bylaw. It applied only to motorized watercraft. We sent another polite, certified letter pointing out the discrepancy. The fines became a weekly absurdity. A $50 penalty for our welcome mat having unapproved botanical imagery. It had a pine cone on it. A $100 fine for the audible distress call of a loon nesting near our dock, which Patricia classified as a noise violation. With each new notice, my file grew thicker. I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. During my weekends, I was a detective, and Patricia Vance was my only suspect. I was building a case, piece by piece, documenting a clear and escalating pattern of targeted harassment. One evening, after a particularly grueling week in the city, I was on a conference call with my senior staff. My second-in-command, Captain Dave Miller, was giving me a rundown of a complicated budget issue. "Don't worry about it, Dave. I'll handle the council on Monday," I said, my voice tight with exhaustion. "Listen, I'm dealing with a low-level harassment situation out here at the lake. A local actor with a fixation on asserting authority. It's a classic pattern. All bluster and no legal foundation. Yeah, I'm just letting her build her own containment protocol for now. The more fraudulent paperwork she generates, the more airtight the final disposition will be. Mark, who was sitting across the room, gave me a small, knowing smile. He was becoming fluent in my professional jargon. He understood that my calm was not apathy. It was strategy. He knew that I was treating Patricia Vance with the same methodical patience I would afford any other perpetrator in a long-term investigation. But I could also feel the personal toll. This cabin was supposed to be my escape from the world of perpetrators and protocols. It was supposed to be the one place I wasn't the chief. Patricia was systematically destroying that. Her obsession was a constant, invasive presence, a poison seeping into our sanctuary. And I knew, with a certainty born of long and bitter experience, that when a perpetrator like Patricia finds their current tactics are failing, they inevitably escalate. The war of paper was over. The next phase would be more direct, more destructive, and far more dangerous. The move from bureaucratic harassment to physical sabotage was a predictable, if cowardly, escalation. Patricia Vance, unable to break us with her blizzard of fraudulent fines, now sought to make our sanctuary a place of anxiety and disrepair. The attacks were small, deniable, and designed to inflict the maximum amount of psychological distress. The fire pit, the genesis of her obsession, was her first physical target. We awoke one morning to find it filled with a foul-smelling concoction of slimy lake mud, algae, and what appeared to be the rotting remains of a fish. The stench was appalling, a deliberate and juvenile act of desecration. It was a message of pure, unadulterated contempt. I felt a surge of cold, professional anger. This was no longer just a violation of rules. It was criminal mischief. While Mark, his face a mask of disgust and fury, began the grim task of cleaning out the pit. I went into investigation mode. I put on a pair of gloves and walked the perimeter of our property, my eyes scanning the ground. It was exactly as I'd suspected. Near the back fence, hidden by a thicket of ferns, were a set of clear footprints in the soft, damp earth. They were small, from a woman's athletic shoe. Beside them were the telltale drag marks of a heavy bucket being pulled from the shoreline. "Mark," I called out, my voice sharp, "bring the camera." We spent the next hour documenting the scene. I had Mark take wide shots of the fire pit and the surrounding area, while I took close-ups of the footprints and the drag marks, with a ruler for scale. "This is our crime scene," I explained, my voice the same calm, instructional tone I used to train rookie detectives. "We photograph everything before we touch anything. We preserve the evidence. We establish a clear, uncompromised chain of custody." The sabotage continued, each act a little bolder. A week later, we found the thick nylon rope securing our small floating swim platform had been cleanly severed. The platform had drifted across the cove and was now bumping against a neighbor's expensive ski boat. It was a clever, two-pronged assault property damage, combined with an attempt to turn our neighbors against us. This time, Mark took the lead on the investigation. He was the one who found the cut rope, the one who insisted we bag it as evidence before he swam out to retrieve the platform. He was the one who went to the neighbor, not to apologize, but to take a formal statement, noting that the neighbor had seen Patricia's pontoon boat idling in our cove late the previous night. He was no longer just my partner in this. He was becoming a damn fine detective. The most personal attack was on the small vegetable garden Mark had planted. It was his pride and joy, a small patch of orderly, productive life. We came out one morning to find every plant systematically ripped out and a corrosive, bleach-like substance poured over the soil, leaving a sterile, stinking scar. That was the moment I felt my professional detachment begin to crack. The cold, analytical chief was being overwhelmed by the furious, protective wife. Patricia had not just destroyed some plants. She had deliberately and cruelly attacked something that brought my husband joy. She feels safe because she thinks she's invisible. I said that evening. My voice, a low growl. We need to take that invisibility away from her. Mark, now fully engaged in the fight, had already spent the day researching. Not a big, obvious system, he said, showing me his laptop. Something discreet. These are designed for wildlife observation. Small, motion-activated, with night vision. We can hide them in the trees, in the birdhouses. She'll never see them. The system arrived 2 days later. We spent a weekend turning our quiet, rustic cabin into a secure, 24/7 surveillance zone. The peace of our sanctuary was now the guarded peace of a fortress. But something had changed between us. The feeling of helpless frustration was gone, replaced by a shared sense of steely purpose. We were no longer victims. We were partners in an operation. And Patricia Vance, the ghost who had been haunting our lives, was about to become the star of a very private, very well-documented motion picture. Having failed to dislodge us with a campaign of petty vandalism, Patricia Vance escalated her attack to a new, more insidious front our reputations. She launched a full-scale propaganda war on the Lakeside Landing community's private social media app, a digital kingdom where her word was law. Her objective was to isolate us completely, to paint us as a clear and present danger to the community, thereby creating a permission structure for whatever she planned to do next. Her posts were masterpieces of malicious innuendo, a word of caution to all residents who enjoy the natural beauty of our lake. One began, accompanied by a photo of a pristine shoreline. It has come to my attention that certain new property owners may not be respecting our fragile ecosystem. The use of harsh, non-approved chemicals on gardens near the water can have a devastating effect. We must all be vigilant stewards of our shared environment. She was twisting her own act of chemical vandalism in our garden into an accusation against us. The comment section became a toxic echo chamber, orchestrated by Patricia and her key ally on the HOA board, a man named George Henderson. The new people in the old cabin. Right. I heard he's a weirdo, always digging in the dirt. Henderson would chime in. The board is monitoring the situation closely. We take environmental protection very seriously. The most dangerous lies were aimed at me. Patricia began to hint at my mysterious and high-stress city job, a narrative she had clearly been building for weeks. It's so important that our community remains a safe, peaceful refuge, she wrote in one particularly venomous post. That's why it's so concerning when people with backgrounds in, let's say, urban enforcement, move in and bring that aggressive, confrontational energy with them. We've had reports of unsettling, late-night activity and a general disregard for our community's peaceful atmosphere. She was a master of inversion. She was the aggressor, yet she painted us as confrontational. She was the one spying on us, yet she accused us of unsettling activity. She was laying the groundwork to portray me as an unstable, dangerous outsider, a threat to the very peace I had come here to find. The digital slander had a real, chilling effect. We were completely ostracized. The few neighbors who had been on the fence now treated us with open suspicion. We were pariahs, isolated in our own home by a wall of lies. The toll on me was immense. My job required me to be a pillar of integrity, a public servant whose reputation was beyond reproach. Patricia's lies, though petty and localized, were a direct assault on my professional identity. For the first time, I felt the sharp, painful conflict between my public duty and my private life. If I used my position to fight back, I risked my career. If I did nothing, I risked my home and my sanity. This is a classic subject isolation tactic. I explained to Mark one evening, my voice tight with a frustration I could no longer conceal. You create a narrative that dehumanizes the target, making them seem dangerous or unworthy. It makes the community feel justified in their ostracism and turns a blind eye to the perpetrator's own actions. Mark, who had once been the passive victim, was now a hardened co-conspirator. "So we fight back," he said, his voice firm. "Not on her terms, on ours." He took the initiative. The next day, he saw George Henderson at the local marina, armed with the knowledge we had gathered. Mark calmly and politely confronted him. "George," he said, his voice steady, "I know Patricia has been spreading some wild stories about us. I just wanted you to know that we have video evidence of her trespassing and vandalizing our property." Henderson, caught off guard, just sneered. "You're threatening us now. Patricia is just trying to protect this community from people like you." He stormed off, but the seed of doubt had been planted. That evening, I knew we had reached a turning point. Patricia's slander was not just an attack. It was a legal vulnerability. "She's crossed a line." "Mark," I said, a cold, clear resolve settling over me. "Slander against a public official is a serious offense. She thinks she's boxing me in, but she's actually just handed me the final piece of evidence I need to build a criminal case against her." I looked out at the dark, quiet lake. The time for passive observation was over. Patricia had declared war on the chief of police. She was about to learn that was a war she could not possibly win. Having successfully isolated us and painted us as a community threat, Patricia Vance, aided by her loyal crony, George Henderson, escalated her campaign to its final and most dangerous phase. She began to systematically weaponize the authority of the county and state, using official agencies as a tool to legitimize her personal vendetta. Each call was a calculated attempt to find a lever that would finally break us. The first official visitor was a deputy fire marshal. He arrived to investigate an urgent and credible complaint, filed by Henderson on behalf of the HOA, about an illegal, unpermitted, and actively hazardous fire pit. The complaint was filled with inflammatory language about glowing embers and the imminent risk of wildfire. I met him on the deck, our thick evidence binder tucked under my arm. I was no longer just a homeowner. I was a law enforcement professional dealing with a fraudulent complaint. I walked the marshal through the fire pit's construction, using the technical language of the state fire code, pointing out the safety features and explaining how it exceeded all regulations. Then, I opened the binder. "Marshal," I said, my voice calm and official. "This is the third time this specific, fully compliant structure has been the subject of a complaint by our HOA president. Here are the previous notices, the photographic evidence of the vandalism committed against it, and a log of her ongoing harassment campaign." The marshal, a reasonable man, looked through the evidence, his expression growing more grim with each page. "Ma'am," he said, shaking his head, "this is a clear pattern of harassment. Your fire pit is perfectly safe. I will be filing a report stating that this complaint is not only unfounded, but appears to be malicious in nature. And I will be forwarding a copy to the sheriff's office." Patricia's next move was more ambitious. An inspector from the state's Department of Environmental Protection arrived to investigate a complaint that we were using an illegal, unrated septic system that was leaking raw sewage into the lake. It was a disgusting, slanderous, and potentially ruinous accusation. I handled this one myself. I presented the inspector with the county permit for our brand new, top-of-the-line septic system, along with the certification of inspection from the installer. As the inspector grudgingly reviewed the documents, he paused. "Miller," he said, looking up from the permit. "You're not related to the new chief. Are you Sarah Miller?" "She's my wife," I said quietly. The inspector's entire demeanor changed. The bureaucratic suspicion was replaced by a look of dawning understanding. "I see," he said. "Well, Mr. Miller, please give the chief my regards. And tell her this complaint is officially baseless." Patricia's weapons were being turned against her. Each official she sent to our door left not as an antagonist, but as an unwilling witness to her obsessive campaign. Her credibility with the very agencies she sought to manipulate was being systematically dismantled. But this series of failures did not chasten her. It enraged her. It pushed her to abandon all pretense of rules and regulations and to embrace a final, direct, and unambiguous threat. The final, desperate act of Patricia Vance's campaign was a masterpiece of twisted logic and naked aggression. It was a move that abandoned all pretense of bylaws and community standards and went straight for the jugular. She used her son, Chad, a swaggering, entitled 18-year-old, as the tip of her spear. Chad appeared at our cabin one afternoon when I was there alone. His presence, an immediate and unwelcome intrusion. He informed me, with the unearned confidence of a boy who had never been told no, that he and his friends would be using our cabin for their prom after-party. "My mom, Patricia Vance, runs this whole place," he'd said with a sneer. "She said you'd see things her way." My firm refusal sent him storming off, but I knew he was just the opening act. The main performance came the next day. Patricia appeared at our property line, a smug, triumphant look on her face, with Chad standing behind her like a sulking prince. "Mark," she began, her voice a syrupy sweet poison. "As you know, prom is a very special night. As the president of this community, I feel a deep responsibility for the safety of our young people. I have decided that your cabin, being so isolated, is the perfect, supervised location for a post-prom gathering." "It's not a public space, Patricia," I said, my voice tight. "It is now," she retorted, her sweet facade vanishing. It was then that I came to stand beside my husband, my arms crossed, my presence a silent, immovable wall. "The answer is no," I said, my voice flat and cold. Patricia's eyes narrowed into slits of pure hatred. "You will give my son the key for his party," she hissed, her voice a low, venomous threat. "Or you will find that this charming, rustic little tinderbox of yours is not as safe as you think. It gets so dry here. One stray spark, one faulty wire. It would be a tragedy." She let the threat of arson hang in the air for a moment, then added the final, devastating twist. "And even if it doesn't burn, a call could be made. An anonymous tip about a wild party. Underage drinking. Maybe some drugs that someone misplaced. It would be a terrible scandal, especially for a woman in your position." That was it. She knew. This was no longer just harassment. This was blackmail against a public official. She was threatening to not only destroy our home, but to end my career with a fabricated scandal. I felt a profound, chilling calm settle over me. The internal conflict I had been wrestling with for months, the wife versus the chief, evaporated in that instant. She had not just threatened Sarah Miller, the homeowner. She had threatened the office of the chief of police. My duty was now clear. "You're right, Patricia," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "It would be a tragedy. We have a family emergency that weekend." We'll be out of town. The cabin will be available." Patricia's face lit up with a look of pure, triumphant evil. She had won. She had finally broken us. She turned and swept away, a conquering hero. Mark looked at me, his face pale with shock. "What have you done?" he whispered. I turned to him, and a slow, cold smile touched my lips. "I've done my duty. Mark," I said, "I have just been given a direct, credible, and specific threat from a hostile subject. She has informed me of her intention to commit multiple felonies. She has given me the time, the place, and the method." I pulled out my phone. "And now," I said, my thumb hovering over the screen, "I am going to allocate the necessary resources to interdict a planned criminal enterprise." I paused. "And as your wife," I added, my voice dropping to a near whisper, "I am going to burn her entire world to the ground." The night of the Lakeside Landing High School prom was a masterpiece of strategic deception. As far as Patricia and the rest of the community knew, we were out of town. Our cabin left empty and vulnerable, a prize for her victorious son. In reality, I was at the heart of a meticulously planned tactical operation, and our cabin was the bait in a trap that had been months in the making. Our command post was an unmarked surveillance van parked at a scenic overlook, half a mile away, but with a perfect, unobstructed view of our cove. The van was a humming, technological marvel from my department, filled with monitors displaying crystal clear, high-definition feeds from the dozen cameras Mark had installed, now augmented with departmental thermal and audio sensors. Beside me, my husband watched, his face a mixture of awe and nervous tension. I was no longer his wife in weekend clothes. I was Chief Miller, in my full, decorated duty uniform, my headset on, my voice a calm, steady stream of professional commands into a secure radio channel. The legal justification for this operation had been the highest hurdle. Using departmental resources for a situation involving my own property was a political and ethical minefield. I had spent 2 days preparing a comprehensive operational brief and a warrant request, using the thick binder of evidence Mark and I had so patiently compiled. I presented it not to a local judge, but to a senior superior court judge in the state capitol, a man known for his rigid, impartial adherence to the law. I formally recused myself from direct command, handing tactical leadership to my most trusted subordinate, Captain Dave Miller, who now sat in the van with us. The judge, after reviewing the overwhelming evidence of escalating harassment, vandalism, and the final explicit threat of arson and blackmail against a law enforcement official, had signed the warrant without hesitation. "This isn't a personal vendetta, Chief," he had said, his voice grim. "This is a direct assault on the rule of law. You have a duty to act." At precisely 11:45 p.m., the operation began. A convoy of expensive cars, led by Chad Vance, snaked down our private road. He and his friends, a dozen entitled youths, piled out and, finding the cabin door unlocked as promised, swarmed inside. On our monitors, we watched their thermal signatures spread through the house. We heard the pop of champagne corks and the thump of loud music. Simultaneously, Patricia Vance's SUV pulled into a predetermined spot down the road. She was the puppet master, the Overwatch. I patched her phone signal into our audio feed. "Yes, it's perfect," Patricia was saying, her voice giddy with victory. "They're all inside. Give it an hour. Let them get comfortable. Then you make the anonymous call. A huge party. Drugs. The works. The police will have to raid it. And our little problem with the Millers will be over for good." That's the conspiracy. I said quietly to Captain Miller. He nodded grimly. I switched my radio channel. All units. Execute. The night exploded. In a coordinated, split-second action, the world around our cabin was transformed. Blinding, military-grade floodlights erupted from the darkness. Sirens, held silent until this moment, screamed to life from all directions, a terrifying wall of sound. The bullhorn boomed across the lake. This is the police, you are surrounded, come out with your hands up. Inside the cabin, the party descended into panicked chaos. Outside, Patricia Vance, her face a mask of pure, horrified disbelief, stumbled out of her car and into the flashing chaos she had created. She saw the SWAT team advancing on the cabin. She saw the police cars blocking the road. And then she saw me, stepping out of the command van, illuminated like a vengeful angel in the strobing lights, my uniform a beacon of the authority she had so fatally misjudged. She froze, her mind finally, catastrophically, processing the reality of her situation. You, she stammered, her voice a strangled gasp. You're a cop. I walked toward her, my boots crunching on the gravel. I stopped directly in front of the trembling, broken woman. I am not a cop. Patricia, I said, my voice cutting through the wail of the sirens. I am the chief of police, and I have you on audio, recorded under a warrant signed by a judge, conspiring to commit multiple felonies. You have threatened my family, you have threatened my home, and you have threatened my career. I paused, letting the full weight of my words land. You once asked my husband who the police would believe, I said, my voice dropping to a low, unforgiving whisper. I believe you have your answer. Patricia Vance, I declared, as two of my uniformed officers stepped forward, handcuffs gleaming in the flashing lights. You are under arrest. The aftermath of that single, chaotic night was a swift and satisfying cleansing. Patricia Vance's meticulously constructed world of power and intimidation was dismantled with a speed and efficiency that left the entire Lakeside Landing community in a state of stunned disbelief. The story of the HOA Karen, who tried to blackmail the secret chief of police, became an instant, cautionary legend. Chad and his friends were processed through the juvenile justice system, their prom night adventure turning into a sobering encounter with the real-world consequences of their actions. They were sentenced to extensive community service and a period of strict probation that served as a harsh lesson in humility. For Patricia, the legal ramifications were devastating. The evidence I had so patiently compiled, from the initial fraudulent fines to the final damning audio recording of her conspiracy, was an airtight case. The subsequent investigation into the HOA's finances, triggered by her arrest, uncovered a long history of embezzlement and financial misconduct. Faced with a mountain of charges, she pleaded guilty. She was sentenced to 3 years in state prison, a stunning fall from grace for the self-proclaimed queen of Lakeside Landing. The HOA board, including her loyal crony George Henderson, was dissolved in disgrace. A new board, composed of reasonable and humbled residents, was elected. Their first official act was to formally apologize to us and to strike every one of Patricia's vindictive bylaws from the community covenants. As for me, I did face an internal affairs review, just as I had known I would. It was a stressful, grueling process. But my meticulous adherence to procedure, the sealed warrant from the judge, and the undeniable evidence of a direct and credible threat against my family and my office resulted in my complete exoneration. I was commended for my professionalism and restraint in the face of extreme personal provocation. Our life at the lake has finally become what we always wanted it to be. The silence is no longer a fragile thing to be guarded, but a deep and abiding peace that we earned. We rebuilt the fire pit, and we sit by it on cool evenings, the only light reflecting off the dark. Still water. We found our sanctuary, and in the end, we were reminded that the quietest people often have the most powerful voices, and that true authority is not about making noise, but in knowing, with absolute certainty, when to command the silence.